transwoman. Our pronouns are she and her. So the title of my talk is India has some progressive trans laws, yet why do I feel so detached from my Indian roots? So what do they mean by that exactly? So my parents, who were born and brought up in India, taught me a lot. I was brought up both in the UK and India, and school in both India and the UK. I grew up blissfully unaware about my gender and sexuality. You learn to repress at a young age in my culture, and that's how I was kind of brought up. Emotion is at the back of everything. Family first, reputation first, that kind of thing. And so you had to conform. Conforming was the way you got moved forward. So as you can imagine, when I came out as trans to my family a few years ago, it didn't turn out so well. One thing that bugged me was that they looked down on me and others for being trans, and especially with like recent laws in India, that which has been in Indian news and sometimes even on the BBC, making it easier for trans people to apply for documentation. They get quotas in universities and educational systems, and special consideration for medical care and free certain subsidies and that kind of thing, government programs. But I still didn't feel welcome, and this was a weird instance of the government moving faster than the majority of public opinion. India is huge, it has over 1 billion people, so while being trans in a huge metropolitan area may be a bit easier, the universal consensus is it's not safe to be trans there. Indian comedy, which is mostly found in Indian movies, where every film is musical action, film, comedy, you name everything, essentially. It could be a horror if you want as well. Trans people are still used as the butt of a joke. So some of the most popular comedic actors from where I'm from, which are almost all male, use the man in a dress trope or in a wide variety of ways as an escape mechanism, or the we tricked you trope. When trans people who are represented as being trans in films, they're used as a point of objectification, to trick the straight male actor, the protagonist or the antagonist in some cases. The opposite also happens in trans media, where they use, in Indian media, where they use trans communities like the Hitler community and other underprivileged communities like homeless children or orphan children as in happy scenes, or where they're purposely pitied and donated food to, or the protagonists hold like a party or a donation thing for them. And it's purposefully used to make the protagonists seem as empathetic, and that's all trans people are using that kind of thing. They're not given character or anything. They're a plot point to develop the protagonists in these films. And the reason I go on about these film and media is the film industry in India is huge. It's people rally behind the actors. Sometimes they treat them like gods. They sometimes give them milk abhishekams, which is the act of pouring milk over a statue. It's a form ceremony, and it's like a blessing. So they do this to celebrate these giant cardboard cutouts when these films release, and there's firecrackers in the street, and it's all exciting hubbub. But even when these immensely popular films, which make ridiculous amount of money, show trans people in such a negative light, it doesn't help changing the view of how to treat trans people in India. Trans people are historically quite poor at the moment in India, and isolated, and treated as like taboo and untouchable. Even though the caste system is abolished, it's quite difficult to avoid that culturally. The law may say that there's no caste system, you can't discriminate by caste. However, within communities itself and the culture, it's still pervasive. So the further issue is that since there's no positive representation of trans people, it makes it hard for people who are trans to come out. And the use of slurs is so commonplace. For example, my family would go, when we go on pilgrimages to temples, you'd see trans people begging. or like offering fortune readings or whatever. And there, my family would use a slur called umbabu, which is quite common in Tamil Nadu where I'm from, and it literally means number 9. And the reason they use the number 9 is it's to say trans people are incomplete because they're not like 10, you know, they're unwhole, they can't decide, that kind of thing. And it's also actually been used in the census, in the state census, as a code for transgender people. So if you put trans on your census documentation, they put the number 9 as the code they use when filing this data away. The lack of understanding of gender in India is strange. For example, I have dual citizenship, so when I wanted to change my name and gender on my overseas citizenship card, when I started transitioning, the process wasn't clear for changing gender. Name was easy enough, there's a, say, change personal details. So, and it was all online, they moved to a completely online system. And so it says change personal details, so I assume maybe I could change my gender there as well. Didn't ask for any evidence or anything like that, which is a bit strange. But the gender options are what baffled me the most. So the options were male, female, transgender. And I can't, how do you like, what's the thinking behind putting transgender as a gender option? Because within that one little drop-down menu, it highlights that trans people are othered, even in the most national parts. Like this is front-facing to like international communities because obviously it's an overseas citizenship, so it's for international citizens of India. And then, so I already feel excluded, and this means for me, I can't go back to that country. I can't go back to India without applying for a visa because my new passport will say my new name and new gender, which won't match my Indian citizenship card. And obviously, at the immigration point, they'll be like, I can't allow you in, and that means I can't go home to the country which I love. What befuddles me the most that is, India wasn't always like this. Gender fluidity was celebrated in India in the past. In the time of kingdoms, transgender people were respected advisors and sometimes ministers to kings and priests. Some priests were transgender too. In fact, the Kama Sutra, the popular sex position book, is filled with people that don't have, that are transgender and are mixed genders and identities and relationships. So then British colonialism happened. And trans people were sidelined almost immediately with the amount of laws they introduced and the fracturing of kingdoms, and that's how they conquered India. Even so, what was strange is even after independence, this continued. So we were continually marginalized, even though it wasn't a thing that Indians used to do. And one of the laws that effectively caused homosexuality to be criminalized was repealed and put back into place in 2013 is a British penal code. It's in fact the same penal code in Pakistan. And this penal code makes it harder not just for homosexual people and LGBT people, it makes it harder for trans people because police and institutions do not understand this difference. They conflate the two because they're both taboo, and therefore they use this law as a way to interrogate, and by interrogate, I mean beat them with a rod. The corporal punishment's pretty big in India. So police and people who are places of power can use this law to actively harass people and make it harder for trans people to find accommodation. And that's why they're sometimes isolated in group homes in more downtrodden areas and face more violence, because they can't go to the police. They can't go and report a crime because they're not taken seriously and they're seen as a crime. Their existence is a crime. So with all of these issues culturally, it feels strange that India has these trans-specific laws which allow getting documentation easier and so on. It was weird because the lawmaker who pushed for these laws was a cis woman, and she faced heavy flack for this, but she was adamant and pushed these through. She wouldn't budge about this, and it's strange. So although the law's there, it doesn't help that trans people are still marginalized in so many different ways. But the change is happening, but the cultural change of the Indian people doesn't happen overnight, especially with over 1 billion people. For example, in personal case, a psychiatrist, a medical professional who had worked for the NHS, in fact, they practiced for 14 years over here, and they went back to India to open a practice. So when I was stuck in India, I told them of my gender dysphoria. They broke their Hippocratic oath by telling my family about the issues I was facing as well. And instead of trying to alleviate the conflict in my head, they said I should ignore it and continue with my studies. And this is the thing. This is a person who has had not like medical degree, years of education, years of practice in what we consider a well-developed nation in the UK. And the fact that they went back to India, open practice, and still continue to discriminate. For example, my uncle does not treat HIV patients because even though he's a doctor and he knows that HIV isn't transmitted in that way and that it's ridiculous, and he will refuse to treat anyone with HIV positive status.
You have to give me his name because I'm in HIV problems.
And so with all this happening, things are slowly changing culturally in India. There have been news anchors and there was one film that had a trans protagonist as the lead, which is, I haven't seen it because I've never heard of it, because it wasn't in Indian media at all. The only reason I know about it is because it was on the Wikipedia page for trans rights in India. So this is weird because in India every film is marketed so heavily. You see ads, everything about it, and the fact that I didn't know about a film that would have appealed to me, and it's unbelievable. And even though there's small changes like news anchors, game shows, trans and stuff, it's slow and they are being portrayed positively, but it's accepted if not tolerated. The one message I want to go with, it's not enough, and one message I want to leave with is, it's not for people under oppression to make the change required. We can persuade and protest, but we need allies more than ever, especially if I want to someday revisit India. So, thank you. Lisa's up next.